Please like, subscribe, and share. Your likes and shares can help us take Athenium and Northeast to the world. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay connected on Facebook for regular content.
Hello and welcome to the Athenaeum. Today we have here with us Dr. Ike Santa to discuss her book Democracy in Sikkim: An Untold Chronicle. Dr. Ike Santa is currently working as assistant professor in the SRM University. She completed her PhD from Sikkim University and has been researching on different topics regarding Sikkim since at least last 5 years. So welcome, Dr. Ike Santa.
Thank you.
Okay. Basically, I would like to start from most important question, and that is why this book? Why you felt it necessary to write this book, and also who this book is for?
Basically, like initially, I haven't thought of a book like this, but I have been reading about Sikkim to understand about Sikkim once we plan to shift from the south to northeast for the first time in our life to the Himalayas. We have been thinking about, like what is it like? What is the people are like? No, because we never lived in a hills earlier. So that was a thing, and also I was also just searching for what are the vegetable kind of flowers are there, etc., etc. That is the way it started. Then I joined Sikkim University, and also I met researchers from the region. Then we used to have a lot of discussions about the politics of Sikkim. That is the current politics of the Sikkim. So I was also thinking, like, basically, if we have to look at, as historians, if we have to look at the present situation in Sikkim politics, then we have to go back to the past to understand what was it like that. And also, Sikkim was one of the youngest state, 22nd state in the Indian Union. Just 1975 joined the Indian Union. So it doesn't have that kind of, the integration which happened in the 1947, that kind of history. So I have been looking into this state, like from that point, what happened during the integration, national integration to Sikkim, why it did not become part of India then, when lot of princely state, more than 500 princely state, uh, some of them are much more bigger than, you can't even imagine that kind of state became part of India. Sikkim kept its identity for some more time. So that way, and also, I like after reading what are the existing material, I got interested to know more about that. How did these political movements started in Sikkim? Is it all of a sudden kind of a thing, or like every time when we talk about Sikkim, we says that it is unique, it is isolated, it is far away from the politics of, or during the freedom struggle, it has did not have any kind of movement in Sikkim, etc. Because whenever people talk about political movement in Sikkim, they begin from 1940s, when the so-called political party, three of the political parties were formed in Sikkim in three different regions: east, south, and west. So how will it happen? Especially when Darjeeling is so close to Sikkim, culturally and physically, and it was one of the hotbed of the freedom struggle. How this Sikkim can remain as an isolated place. That those were the things I was looking into, and accordingly I was making my readings.
Can you share some of your experience which you had during material collection?
Okay, what I did was that basically we don't have a lot of material about Sikkim. We have two different kind of a thing. One is those people who came here to work, especially those officials from Indian side, political officers, or for that matter, people like Nari Rustamji, who was 2 terms Diwan here in Sikkim. Like that, these kind of books are there. And some books are, it is written in the in the interest of the government of India. I mean, because its officials has written that, and some of them are, few of them, like smash and grab kind of a books, that is like in the perspective of the Darbar. So all these books, I have looked into all these books. Then I came across two books. One book is it's a published one, L.B. Basnet, Lal Bahadur Basnet, Sikkim, A Short Political History. This was published in 1974, just 1 year before the merger. And yet another book, it's not a book, it is an unpublished manuscript. That also I came across, Sikkim and Merger with India. It happened in 1977, he completed. By the time things were changed, I think, he must have realized that there is no point publishing such a book. There is no space for in that merger kind of a situation. There is no space for such a book. So maybe that is the reason. We don't know. We assume. So these are the main books available. Then I have read all the available book, including those books like B.S. Das Sikkim Saga. One of the books, quite impressive book. So all this material. And that time I was not aware of that, that something called Palace Archives. They're digitalizing all the documents in the palace. This was done by British Library. It was a commission job. But luckily for us, then palace document also opened up for the public. So we have got lot and lot information. Then in 2019, just before the palace document was open to the public, 2019, GBS Sidhu's book, he was one of the intelligent officers here during the process of merger. Sikkim, Dawn of Democracy, The Truth Behind the Merger, that appeared. So particularly this book, because when I was reading the manuscript, unpublished manuscript of L.B. Basnet, I was thinking maybe this person was so much influenced. I mean, he was there in the field. Maybe he's biased. That's what I thought. There's certain things he has written about the merger. I thought he must be biased. But when Sidhu's disclosure about what happened during those time, as a intelligent bureau person, he was part of RAW. So that when it came out, I realized that most of the things discussed, most of the matters discussed in L.B. Basnet's book was right. Like it corroborated, maybe from two different perspectives. Like Sidhu's book was more or less as a part of a happy person, like, maybe a person who won kind of a thing. Whereas when L.B. Basnet, he was describing it from a perspective of a heartbroken person. So these are the thing. And palace documents also like given a lot of insights, what happened during those years, because the kind of communication, enormous communication between the politicians here and between the government of India and Chogyal and government of India, and about the visits of Indian dignitaries, including Nehru, etc., etc. So many, so many documents are there. So it really helped me, that I also had an advantage over the other people who have written the book earlier, because these were not available. So my case, I could use it judiciously in my book.
So in terms of this pre-merger period, when we look at in terms of discourse, how much this palace readings or writings helps to bring in the narrative from the Chogyal side? Do you think now we have a balanced narrative or multiple narrative now because of the palace readings? I mean, I'm asking also because today it feels like there is kind of an absence of the narrative from the Chogyal's perspective. So as you have already mentioned that most of these popular books, right, these books are usually written by people who have been the agents of at that time of a different country. Now, though we are same country, but at that time it was a different country, and they had different way to look at the things, right? They might have written now in retrospective, but their action of the past also in some way influences what they are writing today. So my question is, do you think today it is much more balanced, or which is because of the palace, the writings that palace is library is producing, or still then work that needs to be done?
I think that with this balance of work, that is mostly it depend upon, who writes what. Okay. And palace material is not that, what we think, like it is not giving the version of the palace about the history. That is the beauty of it. It gives a broader view of what happened during that time, not in the perspective of the Chogyal. Basically, there were material what Chogyal has written to the government of India people. That is from his perspective, right? Apart from that, what material we get, it give a perspective about everything. And sometimes, of course, it is interesting to see that intelligence report. I'm not talking about the Indian intelligence, the intelligence which worked for the Chogyal. That intelligence report, that gives, what Chogyal wanted to have. They have submitted those reports according to what he's looking for. So sometimes, that intelligence report, it's also they categorize. It's quite interesting to see that, whether it can be credible or, semi-credible or kind of, they just distinguish the material. Maybe some of them are hearsays, some of them, most of them were, these people attended the political party's meeting, wherever it happened, then they reported. It is very similar to some kind of a surveillance which happens in any political system. So you have that kind of material also. But at the same time, you also get a kind of objective things about political parties, because there are direct report, because those are the things submitted by the political parties to the monarch, to the Chogyal. So you have all kind of, that how do you use it to write your objective way of your history, that is different. That's the one I thought, I tried to be objective. I don't know, like, how far I succeeded in that, but I tried to be objective because I don't have any stake in that. I neither represent the government of India. I don't represent the Chogyal, the dynasty. So I don't have any stake in that.
Okay. In one part of the book, you have also mentioned how there were some of the secret groups that later on build up to become a political movement, whole political movement. So what I want to ask is, how much was land relation at that point of time had its impact on the formation of these secret groups and political movement against the Chogyal at large? And can you also contextualize the situation before and after J.C. White in terms of land relation, before and after J.C. White came in?
Okay, land relations, like, Namgyal dynasty, they followed exactly the Tibetan land relations. Basically, king held all the land. Okay, right. What I was telling is that land system which followed is whatever Tibetan system followed. Land was held, all land was held by the king, and this has been gifted to Kazis, etc. Some kind of a very loose kind of system was existing that time. What J.C. White did was he institutionalized the land system. That is one important thing. Second thing was that Nevars who were brought from Nepal for the purpose of minting coins, they were also had given land by J.C. White. So a new class of landlords, already Kazis were existing as landlords, a new class of landlords called Thikedas was also originated. Right. They were not socio-economic status-wise, they were not equal to Kazis, but in the hierarchy, they just come just below below the Khasis in terms of the amount of land they held, also in terms of their socio-economic status. So there were two different, two types of landlords here with enormous powers, and the system was too oppressive. Like, if you know a little bit about the history, you must be knowing about Kalubari system, which was followed here, or Jarlanki for that matter, where the peasants were used to carry things for the British, as well as those Khasis who have business with Tibet. Those people also used them and giving minimum or survival subsistence kind of wages. They were not able to make anything, and British also used them. That's the reason also they brought Nepalis to Sikkim. So this, because of this oppressive system, and another thing is that palace was always far away from for these people. If you look at the terrain in the Himalayan region, especially Sikkim, if you look at that, you know that it is not easy for an uneducated, and literacy was 2%, 3% those time person to come and complain about the Khasis here or the noblemen here. Even if the complaint goes there, sometimes very hardly it worked. Only very rare occasions it worked, because these are the people who are surrounded by king also. The king's advisory committee is there. They were also the Khasis and noblemen. So these people did not have much space other than protesting, sporadic protest. Kind of, that's the way these political groups are formulated in the initial stage. So we don't, even though there are reports stating that in the 1920s, the existence of these kind of groups in the society, especially in the South and West Sikkim, but we don't have many documents is talking about that. But Namthang, there was a mention about a group like that, but they couldn't do anything successfully, because by the time the administration suppressed the movement, and there were two brothers from they belong to Nepali community. They ran away to Nepal, and we don't know. And two Lepcha brothers also were there. What happened to them? And there is nothing there in the history to talk about them. And these were the initial, this is the beginning of political parties. People at least they began to protest. Earlier, they used to, if there is one educated person in the community, they used to write memorandums to kings. Sometimes, this is what happened. They exhort us. They take more money from us because nobody ever there to ask. And also the landlords who have been divided into different classes, first class landlord, second class, third class, and fourth class, they were also given rifles or revolvers according to their status. For example, if you are a first class landlord, you will get four rifles. Then it comes like, if you are a fourth class one, you get one rifle with one revolver without anything, because the license is provided along that. So one can imagine that a gun wielding landlord what can they do to these poor farmers? And they also do, sometimes they ran away from the place and they were brought back. And lashing, beating up, all these things were, it was very common, in those days. So against that only, this protest started. So we can easily conclude that, the political movements, the beginning of the political movements in Sikkim was against the oppressive system, feudal system, which existed in those days, because that was more economical. The base was more economical than political those days, right?
So you have also mentioned some of the leaders like Tasi Chiring. Can you give us some of the context how important their role was?
Yeah, Tashi Chiring is when I was doing all this research, even though I could not get a lot of material which I wanted to get to know about that person, which I could not get much material, but he was a well-read person. Like that's maybe like I got really impressed about him. So I have just given this book submitted to him only, like basically. So he was a socialist. That was quite interesting. How did Lohia or Jayaprakash Narayan never visited this region? Gandhi never visited this region, but we have Gandhians among these politicians, and these people were socialist, and and if you read few his important, there's an important document called "Few Facts About Sikkim," right? It gives a vivid history of the status of the poor peasants in this region, how they have been exploited. It is something kind of a Magna Carta, you can call it, it's the beginning, this was the one document that given people everything what they want to know about Sikkim, the socio-economic status in this state. That is the importance of Tashi Sheri. And yes, you know that he was inducted to the ministry, then which was there less than a month. I mean, he was some kind of he was not a prime minister, but he was a minister in that, and it could not survive. And also, interestingly, he could not survive in his party also. After some times, whenever these people, political leaders are inducted to the council of the Chogyal, those people will never listen to the party, and it made Tashi Shering very, very angry and upset. And he started questioning that. As a result, they have thrown him out of the party, and he died as a lonely man. But of course,
I think,
we don't have much material about him. Right?
That was one of the reasons why they were inducted. I mean, Chogyal wanted to induct some of these leaders.
Yeah, maybe that is the politics then that time, because this was basically this was a struggle for gaining glory and power from Chogyal side, and people whatever they can get as democratic rights, or they were also looking for some sort of responsible government. This was a struggle, but unfortunately in that struggle most of the leaders, when they became elected into some position, they never worked towards that. That's what happened, right?
So just like you said, and that came out in your book also, that this was more, I mean, the anti-Chogyal movement was more because of the marginalization, because of the poverty and all different sorts of discrimination that happened. But later on, we also see, and that is something you also have mentioned, that this, I mean, for the time's sake, let's call it kind of a regional movement in Sikkim. That was anti-Chogyal. How did it later turn into, how the argument for merger with India, how did that change came in? How that argument came into this movement?
Okay, right. These three political parties formed in the 1940s. Okay, when by the time that is mid 1940s. Okay, 1947 August, India gets independence. So immediately after that, all the princely state began to integrate with Indian Union. Then that time, the political parties here, they realized that if we just, stay away from each other, like, we have to integrate ourselves to show our strengths together. That's when in 1947, October 1947, they joined as a new political party, Sikkim State Congress. Right. And that party was organized in the line of any provincial congresses which existed in India before independence. So these political parties came together, and if you look at the demand, okay, one of the demands was, the first demand was abolition of feudalism. Again, it was working on that base, they want to change the economic structure of the society. They want to change the social relations in the society. That was the prime concern. And second one is responsible government. And the third one is merger with India. That was, this is because they have got influenced with the integration process of India. That was the thing they thought. Anyway, almost all the states were integrated to India, and this is an opportunity to join India, so that these two things we have been talking about, that is abolition of landlordism, also the responsible government, these two things can be attained by integrating with India. You understand? That was the connection. That is the third thing. Right. It did not take place. We know that time. But what I want to tell you is that this merger as a slogan, which began in the 1940s, interestingly, then it was there in the 1950s. Whenever people go to Delhi to meet, that happen often. They go to Delhi whenever there is a problem. They go to the government of India. Then they raise the issue. 50s they raise the issue, and by 60s, none of the political parties were not raising this issue of merger. And early 70s, no. Then suddenly it came. That is very interesting kind of a fact. But 40s, of course, when they joined together as a single political party, this was one of their strongest slogan. They wanted to be part of the thing, right?
So when Sikkim, after the independence of India, when Sikkim was trying to establish itself as an independent, entity. Okay, in one part of the book, you have also mentioned that Sikkim tried in every forum possible to showcase itself as an independent body or independent state, right? What was the response of Prime Minister Nehru in particular and government of India in general?
That's very important question, because Nehru never wanted to integrate Sikkim with India. One is that it's India's independence is strongly connected to anti-colonial movements. A country which is coming out of this colonial rule, and establishing it as an independent country. These kind of because Sikkim's status was always was not clearly defined. Whether it is a princely state, part of Indian Union, part of this princely state in India, or whether it is semi-independent. That was not very clear, because the three kingdoms, Bhutan, Sikkim, and Nepal. Nepal and Bhutan, somewhat, Nehru also say that the status of these two countries are different from Sikkim. But how far it is different, then he could not also tell. He could not tell, even when they were passing objective resolutions in the Constituent Assembly also, right? But he did not wanted to merge merge Sikkim with India. One is that also that he thought that will create some kind of a bad name for India in the in international arena. If you do like that. And another factor is that somewhat Chogyal also could convince them, arguing thing. And I forgot to tell you about this particular material, because I have gone through almost all the second series volume of Nehru to see that what was the relationship between Nehruvian government to Sikkim. So Nehru himself suggested in one place, saying that Sikkim is more or less connected to Tibet than us. That was the argument which was kept, reiterated again and again by the Chogyal also. We are not part of India. Our culture is different. We are Buddhist country. We are not a Hindu kingdom, and kind of a thing. Okay, so during those years, there was no question of merger. That is the reason in 1950. Yeah.
But it is also quite interesting because Nehru always, of course, Nehru knew the diversity within the India, within the, so-called India at that point of time. But again, when it came to Sikkim, Nehru considered, yes, agreed to Chogyal and said that, yes, Sikkim has separate cultural identity, social identity, right? Anyway, so coming to the point, what happened? I mean, of course, your book's focus is not on this, but still, I would want to ask someone who has worked on the history of Sikkim, what do you think changed when in 75 when Indira Gandhi came into power? And do you agree with Andrew Duff, who brings out in his book Requiem of Kingdom, Himalayan Kingdom,
Yeah.
where he's more into geopolitics of the region? And do you agree with Andrew Duff?
Geopolitical, certain extent, yes. But that moment, I wouldn't agree completely to argument, because the relationship between the US and India was getting improving. That one, China was always there. That threat was always there. Then that it's present also. It continued to be, the threat was there, but China never attacked any of, if you look into the earlier history of Sikkim, China did not never attack Sikkim. Nepal did attack Sikkim few times, and Bhutan did attack Sikkim few times. Not China, even though it is one of the biggest neighbor Sikkim had those days. I'm talking about during the dynasty, right? So, relationship-wise, India's relationship with the US was getting better, right? And there was a period of tension where the US was normalizing its relationship with China. Also, Henry Kissinger's visit to China, and that time there was an issue. Like, if the Chinese and the US relationship are normalized, then it and Pakistan is there on the other side. It was not in favor of India. That could have created some kind of insecurity. That I agree with that thing. But at that point of time, I don't know. I don't think so. Right.
So I can see we have very less time now, approximately 5 minutes. But quickly, I would like to ask you this question, because this is also one of your major point. Can you just shed some light on how, anti-Chogyal movement, people, leaders like Tasi Chiring were also very much influenced by anti-colonial movement, particularly Gandhian movement?
Like, that was the early part of the struggle. Okay, Tashi Chiring, he was there in the 1950s, and he wasn't there. I mean, the movement before the merger began in 1960s, right? Especially the 1960s is the period, is the culmination of so many factors. Chogyal began to establish his authority, and he succeeded in that, right? When the last Diwan left, that time it was called Sidlon, because he started Tibetanizing almost every positions in his kingdom. He left. Not even a Diwan was appointed after that, because he has been looking to even micromanagement of everything, right? That was one of the reasons which must have made India to think that Sikkim is not that old. Sikkim, were like very what I should say, that like, which will be there, which can very much listen to India. I want to use something else, but I just not getting it. Very much for, like, they listen to whatever Indian government says. And one stage happened where the Chogyal refused to listen to the government of India. That might be one of the reasons, other than the geopolitical. Geopolitical was always there. Reasons to to hurry this merger. The main question I looked at is that whether the merger is right or wrong. That was not my concern. Whether the merger was a democratic process. Here I define democracy more or less an ethical concept. That's what I mainly look into the thing in the last part of the book. And like,
so what do you feel?
think,
Was merger achieved in a democratic principle or not?
my conclusion is that it wasn't. This does not mean that I just want to again getting back to the debate, etc. This is, I just want to reconcile what happened in the past, so that we can move ahead without any kind of feelings. That feelings is what I felt here in Sikkim. That feelings is there in people inside, even though many times outside or publicly they won't express it, but that feeling is there. But we have to reconcile with this history, then only we can move ahead. So that was the intention of this work, also one of the intentions.
Okay, so I think we have come to the end of the interview. I'd like to thank Dr. Ike Santa, who agreed to do this interview and discuss her book. And I'd also like to thank all the viewers of the Athenaeum. Thank you very much.
Thank you again.